This is the most divisive Final Fantasy yet, and I'll explain why. Final Fantasy XVI was released last June and quickly sparked some controversy, though initial impressions were mostly positive. As more players dove deeper into the game, opinions began to split, making it another polarizing entry in the series, but for different reasons than usual. Unlike other recent Final Fantasy titles, like the Final Fantasy VII remakes, this game hit the market as a polished, finished product, practically free of bugs. The issues caused by the PS5 firmware update were Sony's fault, not the developers. At first glance, longtime fans of Final Fantasy may not find what they're used to. This game is more of an action title than an RPG, with only a few elements from the genre that made the series famous. To enjoy it, you have to accept this more action-oriented approach. Personally, I enjoy hybrid systems like the FF7 remakes, but here everything revolves around action. You control a single character, fighting with swords, and that's the core of the gameplay. That said, both the action and the cinematics are impressive. A year after its release, I'm still enjoying it, especially when replaying it on PC, where I'm impressed by how good it looks and feels. However, I understand why some felt disappointed. It's not the JRPG experience many expected. If you thought it would be something like The Witcher 3 or similar to FF7 Rebirth, you might feel confused or let down. Still, it's not a bad game. It's just a different kind of Final Fantasy, which has been a trend since FF10. Despite the mixed opinions, I consider it one of the higher quality titles in the franchise. The PC port is excellent, without a doubt. One of its best features is that it preloads the shader cache and lets you adjust the graphics settings before you start playing, something all PC games should do. The flexibility of the graphics menu is remarkable, and the game runs smoothly even on mid-range machines. Plus, the higher resolution compared to the PS5 version is one of the reasons I decided to replay it on PC. Everything looks sharper, which fits well with the game's muted color palette. The combat is extremely smooth and responsive, without any stuttering, which is rare in modern PC games. Also, it's a very polished title with minimal bugs, limited to minor visual glitches like distant flickering or pixelated shadows, but nothing that breaks the experience. Even the mouse and keyboard controls are well implemented, which is rare for a PC port. The price is reasonable too, $50 for the base version, though you can pay $70 and get the DLC, which is definitely worth it as it includes some of the best boss battles. Now, regarding the base game, while I still enjoy it, I recognize that it has its flaws. The first 5 or 6 hours are very linear, almost excessively so. Despite starting in the middle of the action, the pace is slow and feels like they're trying to cram too much information at once, which drags down the beginning despite the intense action sequences. One of my main criticisms is that slow start. However, once the game opens up, it becomes much more enjoyable, though it doesn't add much beyond the excellent combat and the spectacular cinematics. The open maps are quite small for a game of this type, and there aren't many of them. The towns are also small and mostly empty, with NPCs giving out fairly standard side quests. These missions feel a bit outdated, giving the game a slight JRPG touch, even though it's not really a JRPG. When I say it's barely a JRPG, I mean it. It's an action game with some RPG elements, like side quests that often involve killing monsters or collecting items. They rarely offer anything exciting, though they occasionally expand the game's lore. However, the monster hunts stand out as a highlight, both in terms of combat and mission variety. The combat is undoubtedly the best part of the game, especially the boss battles. While it's fast and deliberate, it can become repetitive, especially because there's a lot of it. Some battles, particularly with bosses, can feel drawn out, with enemies acting like health sponges that take a while to wear down. If that kind of grind frustrates you, some of the fights might feel a bit tedious. The story has also divided opinions. Clive, the protagonist, may seem like the typical anime hero with something to prove, but the excellent voice acting, especially from Sid, helps carry the narrative. At first, the story seems to promise Game of Thrones-style political intrigue, but halfway through, the game shifts into more of a straightforward spectacle, becoming something like Final Fantasy's version of Attack on Titan. It's in these spectacular moments that Final Fantasy XVI truly shines. The game features some of the most over-the-top, mind-blowing boss fights I've seen. These epic monster battles, while not too challenging, are more interactive than you might expect. They're more cinematic than difficult, which makes sense because if they were too hard, they'd ruin the experience. Interestingly, these big bosses tend to be the easiest, while some of the other fights can be more tense and challenging. Visually, the game is stunning. The characters and cinematics look incredible, and some areas, like the Greatwood, are impressive. However, much of the game takes place in dull castles or rundown towns that, while well-designed, feels somewhat uninspired. It gets worse in the second half, as the world becomes more post-apocalyptic, covered in a purple-gray haze. This choice makes the game look worse, in my opinion, as everything becomes blurrier and harder to see. I hope some modder adds a bit of color to the world. Overall, Final Fantasy XVI has a lot to love, but it also has its flaws. Some people will never enjoy it on principle, but for me, I'm glad to see Square Enix deliver a Final Fantasy with a clear vision. It's not a disaster, and the PC port is fantastic. You could argue that the gameplay is a bit safe or unambitious, but it feels like a classic RPG from the PS3 era, updated for modern hardware, and I find that simplicity refreshing. It's also nice to play a combat system that isn't just a copy of the Soulsborne games. The combat is clearly influenced by Platinum Games, which I love. It's not exactly Bayonetta, but it's satisfying for a long, epic adventure with great combat. I had a blast revisiting this world, flaws and all. If you understand what this game is trying to be, I think it's worth every penny, whether it's $50 for the base game or $70 with the DLC. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Let's talk in the comments. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. We upload new videos almost every day, so hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to stay in the loop. As always, thanks so much for watching.